It was Christmas Eve, and the world was wrapped in the warmth of the season. People were hustling, rushing to finish last-minute shopping, and preparing for cozy family gatherings. But for Jason, a mechanic in a small town, Christmas Eve was nothing like he expected. He should have been heading home to his wife and kids, ready to unwrap presents and enjoy a festive dinner. Instead, he found himself working under the hood of a car, in the dim glow of a streetlight, his hands covered in grease, and his mind far away from the holiday spirit. It all started when he got a call that evening. A woman, stranded on the side of the highway, had called his shop in desperation. Her car had broken down in the middle of nowhere, and she needed help fast. Despite the holiday rush, Jason couldn't ignore the request. After all, that's what he did. Help people when they were in need. So, he packed up his tools and made the short drive to the highway, unaware of how this single decision would change the course of his life. When Jason arrived at the scene, he wasn't expecting much. He figured it would be a simple fix, a flat tire, or maybe a dead battery. But as he approached the car, he noticed something strange. It wasn't just any ordinary car. It was a luxury vehicle, sleek and pristine, far beyond the typical cars he worked on. The woman sitting inside was even more of a surprise. She wasn't what Jason had imagined. No, she wasn't just some random driver in need of assistance. She looked out of place, like someone who didn't belong on this lonely stretch of road. She was calm, collected, and a bit too polished for a situation like this. Her eyes were a striking shade of blue, her hair styled effortlessly. Despite the late hour, she didn't seem the least bit worried, as though she'd dealt with emergencies like this before. When she rolled down the window and introduced herself, Jason was taken aback. Her name was Olivia, and her voice carried a sense of confidence that was almost unnerving. "Thank you for coming out here," she said, her tone warm yet distant. "I really didn't know who else to call." Jason didn't think much of it at first. He assumed she was just another woman stranded by a breakdown. He tried to brush off the strange vibe she gave off and got to work on her car. But as he looked under the hood, he quickly realized this wasn't going to be an easy fix. The issue was more complicated than he thought. Something deeper in the engine had gone wrong, and the car wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. It was clear this wasn't something he could fix with the tools he had on hand. As the minutes ticked by, Olivia remained composed, her gaze fixed on Jason as he worked. It was as if nothing could rattle her. He tried to offer some reassurance, telling her it might take a while to fix, but then she said something that caught him off guard. "You know, I should have never driven out here tonight," Olivia said softly, almost as if she were talking to herself. "It's funny how the smallest decisions can change everything." Jason glanced up, but before he could ask her what she meant, Olivia quickly changed the subject, mentioning she had a backup plan. She wasn't in a rush, she said, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Despite her calm demeanor, there was an odd tension in the air. As time went on, Jason realized just how far removed Olivia seemed from this small-town mechanic's world. Everything about her, her car, her speech, even the way she carried herself, felt distant, like she was someone who didn't belong in this world of grease-stained overalls and late-night repairs. But as he struggled with the car, something more unusual began to unfold. With each passing minute, Olivia's phone rang again and again. At first, Jason thought it was just a coincidence, but the way she ignored every call made him wonder. She wasn't just ignoring any old call. These were calls that seemed urgent, and her unbothered attitude only made it more curious. Was she avoiding someone? Was there something she didn't want him to know? Finally, when he had no other choice but to admit that the car couldn't be fixed right then and there, Olivia asked if he could drive her to the nearest town. She was insistent, It wasn't what he wanted to do, but he agreed, figuring he could drop her off and return home. As he drove, the silence in the car was palpable. The roads were quiet, the Christmas lights twinkling faintly in the distance, but Olivia remained distant, lost in thought. Then, as they neared the town, Olivia spoke again, but this time, her words sent a chill down Jason's spine. "I should have told you sooner," she began, her voice quieter now. "But you wouldn't. Believe me if I did." Jason looked over at her, confused. What was she talking about? Who was this woman really? Jason's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he brought the car to a stop. The engine sputtering into silence, the headlights cut through the cold, empty night, casting long shadows across the road. He turned to Olivia, whose gaze had drifted out the window. The air between them was thick, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment to unfold. For a second, Olivia said nothing. She simply stared out at the dark horizon, lost in thought. Jason waited, his heart racing, unsure of what to say. His mind was still trying to catch up with everything that had happened. Who was this woman? And why had she been so calm about being stranded in the middle of nowhere? On Christmas Eve, there was something about her, something just beyond his understanding, that kept pulling him in. Finally, Olivia turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something Jason couldn't quite place. "Jason," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I think it's time I told you the truth." Jason swallowed hard, unsure of what to expect. He'd always believed in simple answers, in the mechanical world of nuts and bolts, where problems had clear solutions. But the longer he spent with Olivia, the more he realized this was a puzzle, with pieces he couldn't quite fit together. He wanted to ask her more, to demand answers, but something in her presence kept him still, listening to her every word. "I know this is going to sound crazy, but you have to trust me," she began, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of her coat sleeve. "I'm not just any woman. I'm not just a random driver who got stuck on the side of the road. I'm someone important, someone people would do anything to find." Jason raised an eyebrow, his confusion deepening. "Important? What do you mean?" Olivia's eyes darted around, as though she were afraid someone might be listening in. Then, in a quiet whisper, she said, "I'm the daughter of a man you wouldn't believe. Someone with power. Someone who's been pulling strings in this town for years. My father is a businessman, a man of influence. And right now, he's in serious trouble." Jason didn't know what to think. It sounded like something out of a movie. He had heard rumors about wealthy families, about shady dealings, and untold stories that lurked behind the town's shiny exterior. But this, it felt unreal, almost too far-fetched to believe. "Your father?" Jason asked, his voice betraying his skepticism. "You're telling me your father's in trouble?" Olivia nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line. "Yes, Jason. He's been involved in things that have caught up with him. Dangerous people have been looking for me, and they won't stop until they find me." Jason's mind raced, the pieces starting to fall into place. This wasn't just about a broken-down car. Olivia wasn't a simple woman who'd had a bad night. She was running from something. And now somehow, he was caught in the middle of it. "Why come to me?" he asked, his voice a mix of frustration and curiosity. "You could have called anyone, but you called me. Why?" Olivia hesitated for a moment, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "Because I didn't know who else to trust. My father's enemies. They have eyes everywhere. I needed someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. Someone who wouldn't know who I really was." Jason felt a chill run down his spine. It was all beginning to sink in. Olivia wasn't just a random stranger. She was someone tied to something much larger, something far darker than he could have imagined. But before he could process everything, the sound of a car engine roared to life in the distance. Olivia's face went pale. "They're here," she whispered urgently. "They've found me." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He turned to look, his eyes scanning the road for any sign of movement. Sure enough, a pair of headlights appeared, cutting through the foggy night. The car was speeding toward them, fast and unmistakably familiar. Jason recognized the vehicle. It was a black SUV, sleek and intimidating, the kind of car that didn't belong on these rural roads. Before he could react, Olivia grabbed his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "We need to go, now." Jason didn't hesitate. He slammed the car into drive and sped off, the tires screeching against the icy road. Behind them, the SUV followed closely, its headlights a constant reminder of the danger that was closing in. Jason's mind raced as he pushed the car faster, his hands gripping the wheel tighter. The icy roads made every turn treacherous, and the SUV wasn't far behind. "Where are we going?" Jason asked, his voice tense. "What do they want with you?" Olivia's face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. "I don't know," she admitted, "but they won't stop until they get what they want." Jason's stomach churned. This wasn't just some random encounter. Jason's mind was racing, and his grip on the steering wheel was starting to hurt. The SUV behind them was relentless, gaining on them with every turn. He had no idea where to go, no clear plan, and no way of outrunning them on these winding roads. His pulse pounded in his ears, and the cold sweat on his brow was enough to make him question if he could keep going. But Olivia's words echoed in his mind. "They're after you too." What did she mean? Why would anyone want him involved in this? Just when Jason thought they couldn't outrun the black SUV any longer, Olivia reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small device. It was a tracker, a simple little gadget that looked like it belonged in a spy movie. But she acted like it was just another tool. She punched a few buttons, and suddenly the sound of the SUV's engine seemed to fade, as though they were no longer being followed. Jason glanced at her in disbelief. "What did you just do?" "I activated a jammer," Olivia said, her voice steady now, despite the chaos around them. "It blocks their signal. They can't track us anymore." Jason was stunned. He didn't know whether to feel relieved or even more terrified. "Who are you, Olivia? What's really going on here?" she sighed, looking out the window. The tension in her face had softened a little, but there was still something haunting in her eyes. "I wish I could have told you earlier," she said, quietly, "but I needed to be sure I could trust you. I didn't just get stranded on the side of the road by accident, Jason. I've been trying to get away from my father's enemies for months now. People who want me to do things I don't want to do. Things that could ruin everything. And you got caught in the middle of it." Jason's heart was still racing, but a strange calm was starting to settle over him. The car ahead, the men chasing them, they weren't just random criminals. This was part of something much bigger, something that had been going on long before he even knew who Olivia was. "Your father," Jason started, still piecing everything together. "What kind of trouble is he in?" Olivia glanced at him, her expression conflicted. "He's not just a businessman, Jason. He's part of a larger network of people who control industries, finances, the things that make the world go round. I found out what they were really doing, the people he was working with, the dirty money they were making. I couldn't stand by and let it happen anymore, so I left. But they've been chasing me ever since. They don't want me to talk." Jason's head was spinning. This wasn't just a case of a random mechanic helping a stranded woman. This was something far more dangerous, and Jason had unknowingly stepped into it. He looked at Olivia, the weight of her words settling in. "Why didn't you tell me all of this sooner?" Jason asked, his voice soft, but with a touch of hurt. "You could have trusted me. I would have helped." Olivia was silent for a moment, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her jacket. "I couldn't risk it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I had to make sure you weren't just another pawn in their game. They've got people everywhere, even in this town. I didn't know if you were a part of that, but now I see you're not." There was a heavy silence between them as Jason processed everything. He didn't know how he felt, relieved to know the truth, but also horrified by the reality of it all. His world had just been turned upside down, and there was no going back. He had helped Olivia, yes, but in doing so, he had put himself in the line of fire. People were after them both now, and Jason had no idea how they were going to get out of this alive. Olivia broke the silence, her voice filled with determination. "We need to end this, Jason. I can't run forever. I can't hide. I need to expose what's happening, and you're the only one who can help me." Jason looked at her, the weight of her words settling over him. This wasn't just about a woman in need of a mechanic. This was about something far bigger than either of them. They were in this together now, and if he didn't act, everything he knew and loved could be swept away in an instant. "All right," Jason said, his voice steady now. "What do we do?" Olivia nodded, relief flashing across her face. "I have a plan. We go back to my father's estate. That's where the evidence is, where everything that could expose them is hidden. If we can get there before they do, we can make sure it all gets to the right people." With a new sense of purpose, Jason turned the car around, heading in the direction of Olivia's father's estate. He knew the risks, but he also knew there was no other choice. Whatever it took, he had to help Olivia, even if it meant facing down the dangerous people who wanted to silence her.